Picture a shoreline, the tide going out and the sand wet and shining, that bright seam where the water hands the land back its edge. This is an ancient edge between us humans and the gods and their magic. The Greeks said the goddess of love was born here, rising out of the sea foam, arriving on a shell already herself. The land of Venus, where love comes ashore. And there's a certain kind of person who walks a beach like this and cannot stop bending down to pick up things. A shell, a smooth piece of sea glass, a stone with a hole worn clean through it. They don't always know why they pick this one and not that one. They just know it's worth keeping. And if you're lucky, they will hold the shell to your ear and tell you what the sea is saying. My guest today is one of those people. So welcome to Romancing the Threshold. I'm Vanessa Couto, and I'm so glad you're here with me and my guest, Kelly Jarvis, who is a writer, a poet, and a professor of literature, which is to say, she has spent her whole life walking the shoreline of stories and pocketing the pieces that the so-called serious world steps right over. It's fairy tales, folklore. The genres we are taught they are too small to be worth much. Her debut novel, Sea and Stars, comes out July 7th, and it's a gothic retelling of Beauty and the Beast, set between the wild fairy country of the Isle of Skye in Scotland and the old whaling town of Mystic, Connecticut. Here's what I want you to listen to. Kelly comes at all of this through literature, climbing up through the text the way she was trained to. I come at it from the other direction, down through myth and psychology, and yes, the stars. And right in the middle of this conversation, we meet. She has a lovely old name for that meeting, borrowed from the world of fairy tale. She calls it sky magic and earth magic. So this is a conversation about small magic, the kind that lives in herbs and tea and the choice to really see someone. And underneath it, the question I keep circling back to. Why is it always the things we've been told to dismiss, the fluff, the fairy tale, the love story, that turn out to be carrying the medicine? So let's go find out. All right, Kelly, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I love your podcast, and I'm delighted to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've loved your book, and it's been really good having our little chats on Instagram since we met through the magic of Instagram. And thank to Sharon Lynn Fisher, too, because I think that's how we met through the podcast I did with her.
Absolutely.
Well, one thing we were just chatting before I started recording is the experience of writing, you as a professor and teaching literature, and now as the writer, and how now meeting readers and getting to hear what they see in your book. And you just, before we hit record, you mentioned something that Emerson said. So I think we could start there. I thought that was an interesting entry point. Can you tell us the quote?
Emerson. And I think it was Emerson who said that there's creative writing and there's creative reading. So the writer brings something to a story, but the reader also brings something to a story. And I've always believed that the meaning of a story is created in that liminal space between the writer and the reader. Mm-hmm. So it is interesting to be both a teacher of stories and a writer of stories, because I am simultaneously thinking of the story that I want to tell and the story that someone will one day be reading.
And how's that process for you? Does it help you like let the flow of creativity run through you, or does it play out in a different way?
I'm not sure. My process is probably a little bit of a mess because of it, because I think about things from every possible angle. So I don't know that I have the most efficient process for writing. for sure. But it's just the way that my brain works. I've been thinking about stories and talking about stories for so long that I see them as separate from myself, even when I'm writing them.
Mm. Well, two things I hear that I think it's already interesting. One, and I have heard this from other authors, so I think it's really interesting to our culture. It says something about our culture. The writer's saying, "Oh, my process is messy," and I don't know if this is how you feel, but I feel, even for myself, when I say, "Well, my process is also messy," there's a tone of judgment as if it shouldn't be. But part of me is like, well, creativity in general is, to me at least, more of a spiral rather than a linear process. And if we want efficiency, well, then we'll just give it to computer and AI. We'll just give it to them. They will do the efficient thing. But as a creative, I feel it's like there's a pregnancy, there's a gestation, and labor is messy.
It is messy.
And so I think, why do we think it needs to be neat? It's just your process.
I love your image of the spiral, because I think that definitely speaks to the way I certainly create, that idea of looping back around and going back to the beginning after you move forward. That's just very much encapsulates the way that I tend to write. And I love that you don't judge the fact that creation is messy. And oftentimes in creation stories, right, stories about the creation of the universe, you have this idea of creation from chaos, or someone diving down into the primordial ocean and bringing something up from the depths. And I think that none of that is neat or efficient either. So I definitely don't mean to judge my process or anyone's process by saying that it's messy, but it's a hard thing to talk about because it is not something that happens in a linear fashion.
No. And I feel, just in terms of the culture that we live in and this optimization and improvement and all, I feel like stop. Let's just allow it and see how it goes, a little bit. I have a container for it, but let's see how it goes. So maybe we will become a culture that is less neurotic. That's my hope. That's just my Pollyanna, hope, that if we normalize it, it becomes a bit more, it just is.
Yeah, romanticize it and cherish it.
And we know romance is messy.
Romance is messy as well. Yes.
So, well, just a little bit background for the listener here. And of course, I'll have this in the beginning, but one of the things that we met through Instagram and all that, but I got to read your book that's coming out in July 7th.
Yes.
So I'm pitching already. Run, pre-order, get it. If nothing else, it's a beautiful cover. But the book Sea and Stars, and I had a pleasure of reading it. And I loved it because it had a feel, it's like one of these books that I felt like I still go there. It's like, when you finish a book and you miss it, and even when you're still reading it, you miss it. Like you go about your day. You had to pause and you're like, I'm ready to go back. I'm ready to go back to that vibe, to the vibe of the book. And it's interesting because it's not a part of, I have not read a lot of historical novels or romance, but I love history. But to me, mid 1800s in the US is not a part of history that I'm a huge fan. But I was transported by it, I was really, and so it kind of even changed my mind around that, this time in history of the US. But I was curious here, as the creator, how did Sea and Stars arrive for you? I know you have a little bit at the end of the book in your notes of how it came to be, but tell us, what was the first thing you saw or felt or kind of felt touched by the characters of this story?
Well, first I want to thank you, because that's one of the the kindest things I think you could say to someone who's written a book is that you miss the book or you think about the book even after you've put it down. So that just means the world to me. So thank you for saying that. But Sea and Stars did begin as a little character vignette that I had written for the Fairy Tale magazine. It was called Midsummer Magic, and it was about a woman named Arabella Porter, who was the last in a long line of fairy healers from somewhere in Scotland. And she was just wandering around through the woods collecting ingredients for her potions and her spells. It was very, very short. And when I sent it to my editor at the magazine, she said to me, Kelly, I love it. You have to give her a romance. That was her immediate reaction to the story that I had written. So the next year, she asked me to write another piece for the summer solstice, and I returned to the character of Arabella. And this time she had moved across the ocean to America. She was isolated and alone, and she did the little ritual that she does in the book on the summer solstice and met a character named James Alden. And again, it was very short, only 1,500 words, and it stopped just after they had met. But I submitted that to her, and she said, we are not publishing this. You are going to write this as a romance novel. So it very much began with the characters and the feel of the characters and the love that they had for one another, and everything grew out of that. I wasn't really sure when I was writing those early pieces exactly what the setting was, either the physical setting or the temporal setting. It was just something that happened in this world of story and in this time of story. And it wasn't until I started researching to write the novel that I really assigned places and a specific time to the story. And I landed on the 19th century because for me, the 19th century is my comfort century, more the British literature, right? I love
that's what I would say too, yeah.
Right? Oh, I love Regency romance and I love Victorian romance. But as you say, in America in the 1800s, that's a little bit of a different thing. But I just kind of went from there, and that's how the story turned out.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm a Jane Austen girl, the Victoria, all that, you got to have top hat, corset, sign me up. There's a castle. I'm in.
Yeah. You can't beat a corset in a castle.
Cannot. Period. BBC period piece.
Right there. A corset in a castle.
Absolutely. But this is interesting, but maybe you might not even remember, but I'm curious, how did, Arabella even come to you from that little vignette? How did she knock on your door?
That's a good question. It was a long time ago that I first wrote that story. I think it was in 2021 that I wrote that for the magazine. And my editor had just asked me to write a piece for the summer solstice so that we could post it on our socials. And I was thinking about what I could write about, and there she was. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure exactly where I found her or where I get any of my ideas. I think they come from somewhere outside of myself. I like to use the analogy of walking along the shore, and there are all kinds of shells and rocks and bits of broken glass along the shore. And as you're walking, you pick up the pieces that catch your eye. And I think that telling stories is a lot like that. You just find little things that catch your eye, and somehow you metabolize them into a fully formed story.
Yeah, I'm just thinking here, the way I felt the character of Arabella was that she had this quiet, very grounded presence. But at times I felt that almost like the story was about him, not so much about her, but that her magic, if you will, her presence was a catalyst. There was a gentleness to her. So as you're telling me how you felt her, I'm kind of sensing as if she showed up to you in the same way I felt her presence in the story. Wherever the veil she crossed to your story, it was just as gentle as sort of, not pushing. She wasn't demanding, give me the whole book. She was like, no, I'm okay. A vignette is fine,
Oh, that's really beautiful. Yeah. And I have had people who read the book and feel it is more centered on Arabella. And then some people feel it's more centered on James. And some people feel it's about their relationship. And other people feel it's about the magic. And I suppose it's about all of those things in part. And then it's what the reader brings. Mm-hmm. And what the reader sees in the story. So I love that you do love James as a character, because I also love James.
How can we not love James? I'm not giving any more, but, I'll leave it to the listener. But, can't. But he also mentioned that, it is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And so now we're getting to your wheelhouse here of fairy tales. What is it about Beauty and the Beast, and what's the other myth that's even kind of in the story? I always confuse. I love that story. And East of the Moon, West of the Sun.
East of the Sun, West of the Moon.
Yeah, love that story. Can never remember the title. But what is it about these two fairy tales, and even a little bit of the dash of a little Bluebeard happening? What is it about these fairy tales that sort of inspired you?
So Beauty and the Beast has always been my favorite fairy tale since I first saw it. And my first introduction to Beauty and the Beast was the Disney movie. I went to see it when it came out. I think I was in high school at the time, and I went to see it with my boyfriend, and I absolutely fell in love with the story of Beauty and the Beast. And I loved the character of Belle in the Disney movie because she had brown hair and she loved to read, and she felt like she was outside of the world that she lived in, and she dreamed of something more that she could only articulate as adventure in the great wide somewhere, but she wanted it so fiercely. And she was also beautiful. And I thought that that was really interesting because everything that I had read up until that point, the smart girl or the girl who liked to read was never the beautiful one or the desirable one. So I really loved that Disney, in their iteration of Beauty and the Beast, gave us this character who didn't have to fit into one of those two boxes, but that she could occupy both. I really loved that. And it wasn't until I was older that I read Beaumont's version of Beauty and the Beast and East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which is an older, earlier orally circulated variant of Beauty and the Beast. And I think that the thing that I really love about all of the Beauty and the Beast variants is the emphasis on choice. Some people will say Beauty and the Beast is a story about Stockholm Syndrome, and I actually disagree. I really think that Beauty and the Beast is a story that gives the protagonist choice. And I also think it's a story that has a thread of authenticity to it, that the Beast loves Beauty not because she's beautiful, but because of who she is. And Beauty loves the Beast not in spite of the fact he's a beast, but because of who he is as well. And I think when someone loves you in that very authentic way and chooses you, that can be a really empowering thing. So I think I've always been drawn to the fairy tale of Beauty and the Beast. Bluebeard is in many ways the shadow tale of Beauty and the Beast. And oftentimes I teach them together when I'm teaching my fairy tale and folklore class, because of course Beauty falls in love with a beast and finds out he's truly a man, but the wife in Bluebeard falls in, or I don't know that she falls in love, but she marries a man and finds out he's truly a beast. So the two tales really haunt one another and work in tangent with one another. So I think that's why they manifest in my story. When I went to turn my vignettes into a novel, of course, I looked to fairy tales to help me do that because I do work for the Fairy Tale magazine. So I spend a lot of my time rewriting and reworking fairy tales for adult audiences. And I think that I chose Beauty and the Beast because it is my favorite story, but also because Arabella's name sort of fit into the idea of Beauty and the Beast. Of course, it means beautiful and it means prayer. And the first part of the name, Air, the air in Arabella, reminded me a little bit of Jane Eyre, right, from Charlotte Bronte's novel. And I would argue that Jane Eyre is also a Beauty and the Beast informed story as well. So I think it sort of made sense from there to use Beauty and the Beast as a template for putting James and Arabella together in a romantic story.
Yeah, Beauty and the Beast is also my favorite fairy tale. I was not introduced by it with Disney. Much earlier, my mother gave me this it was a giant book, big, that had all these fairy tales, and it had that one. So it wasn't the Disney. But like yourself, what I liked about Beauty was in a way that let's just say she was the intellectual heroine. I mean, she was well read. She liked to read. And as a book lover, even as a kid, I was like, this is my girl. This is my girl. Yeah. But I think even then, as a kid and then later as a teenager, I've always felt attracted to that story because to me, it's the ability to see beyond the appearance. And it always stayed with me. So to this day, any story that says, oh, it's based on Beauty and the Beast, I'm like, sign me up. I'm here for it. At a castle, and I'm really in it. But I think it's a deeply psychological story. And I can see why people would say it's the Stockholm syndrome, which, by the way, just recently I read that it was a kind of a fake diagnosis. The woman who they played, they say, she was the reason why the psychiatrist came up with the idea of a Stockholm syndrome. She has written and said it was not that, So, but I think what's interesting about Beauty and the Beast for these times, I think, because as we're seeing, there are a lot of retellings of fairy tales, and romance authors are using fairy tales one way or another. And I think because I'm a lover of monster romance, that's an homage to Beauty and the Beast. I think there's something in the zeitgeist that's saying, hey, this is needed because we are living in a culture that we can't tell what we see. We don't know. Appearances are no longer factual in a way, it could be. So I think it plays to a deeper part.
There's something very embodied about the beast as a character and falling in love with the beast as a beast, right? She doesn't think he's going to transform into a prince. That's not the reason she falls in love with him. She truly loves him as he is. And there's something appealing, I think, about the animal parts of who we are, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we do culturally tend to dismiss the animal parts as being less important than the divine parts of us, the intellect and the rationality. But we are animals, right? We are bodies. We have desires and we have needs. And I do think the beast and the monster romances that come of the Beauty and the Beast story speak directly to that very real need that we have as humans.
Yeah, it's a real invitation back to the body, right? Everything is, all their senses are very pronounced, right? But if you think about, since you work with fairy tales, and this fairy tale has stayed relevant on and on through the centuries, what does it keep teaching you as an individual? And having written a whole book kind of inspired by it, what did it ask of you this time around?
That's such an interesting question. And I think that you're hitting on something about how fairy tales work in general, which is that they on the surface seem to teach such simple lessons, right? Look beneath the surface, learn to love yourself, don't trust a stranger, right? Be kind to others, right? All these simple lessons that we extrapolate from the tales, but they're lessons that we need to learn again and again and again over the course of our lives. We don't learn them the very first time we encounter them, and it's very difficult to apply that knowledge to future circumstances. So I think the fairy tales remain relevant for that reason. Beauty and the Beast is one of the oldest and most popular of all fairy tales that have been circulated. You can trace its history back, further than many other fairy tales. And I do think there's something about the animal nature of our human existence that is important to that tale and that keeps that tale relevant. Because no matter how intellectual or how rational we are bodies, right? We are born and we live and we die and we live this sensing existence on this earth. And I think the beast has some lesson to teach us about that.
Yeah.
When I was using Beauty and the Beast for my book, of course, mine's not a monster romance. Not that I don't love a good monster romance, but I don't have a monster in my book. So James, my beast character, is beastly in other ways, right?
Yeah.
So I had to really think about the story of Beauty and the Beast metaphorically. What is it that makes Beauty beautiful beyond her surface? What is it that makes the beast beastly beyond his surface characteristics? And I think that writing Sea and Stars helped me to explore the beauty and the beastliness within the human as I was telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah. It was much more psychological to me, and the scene that comes to mind for me that really stayed with me is when he does not kill the whale when he's younger, and he gets beaten for it, for disobeying the captain. And that really stirred me, because I felt this was a great scene that encaptures how, in many ways, men are made into beasts by the very system that captures them, if you will. The society, the culture strips the sensitivity out of them, literally whipping it out of them. Yeah. And I thought that scene, even though it was sort of a small scene, it felt to me, I could see the monstrosity that James was made into, and in a way that he thought he was, and how being with Arabella was a catalyst for him coming back to be humane. And he was doing things to be humane. But to me, yes, it was very psychological. I think it's a good point to see, how do we see the beast and the beauty when the surface is, doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
I was thinking also here about when you're talking about the body. This is, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago now, actually. I did an ayahuasca. I was in an ayahuasca ceremony, and it really changed my life. Like, it was one of those sort of experiences that, if you will, if you ever seen this illustration, it shows a man looking beyond the dome of the sky and seeing the universe. It's an old woodcut image of a man kind of on his knees, and he's peeking beyond the sky dome, and he sees the universe. It felt like that. It was sort of like mind blown. And one of the things that stayed many things stayed from that experience, but one of the things that stayed with me was the relationship with the body. And the experience of feeling like, oh my God, this body, it isn't just a vessel to carry the soul or the spirit. It was a true companion. It was his twin. There was no spirit or soul without the body. And I remember coming back from that experience really like, wow, the body isn't just this performance machine that I got to eat the healthy stuff or to keep it going. It is not. It is the true container. And it really changed my relationship with the things that are physical. And then when you look at the world around you, you can start seeing, I really got me thinking about the non-human in the world. And we're so human focused because, of course, it's us. But there's a whole universe around us speaking other languages, but they just don't happen to be human. And I think I really was drawn to monster romance. Well, I love Beauty and the Beast, but I think it has to do with the sense of the body, the bringing back of the wild, the wild element that isn't fit for cocktail party conversations.
Yeah. Right. And I think that wild element is so important. And even the magical systems in my book, I think, lean into that wild element. There's not a lot of high fantasy in my book, but there's just a hint of fairy magic sort of out of the corner of your eye. And it's very much associated with the earth. I love that you say you felt like Arabella was very earthly as a character because she is very much associated with the earth and the herbs and the growth of plants and that sort of fairy magic that does come from the land itself. And maybe the plants, maybe the sunlight, maybe the ocean water is speaking to us in ways that we just can't comprehend. And that is in some way a form of magic. So it all kind of loops back around together that we do have this embodied experience on this earth in this life. We only know this life through our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the sense I had from that journey is that there's no rising if not through the deepening of the body, of the physicality. This is the whole, if you will, program of this planet. It's the physicality. We go through the physical. So there are parts in the book when she's talking about the plants and the tea. It was all very, if you will, kind of like small magic, but everyday magic. It just is. But it was her perspective into doing those things to me felt, we can do this. We probably do this all the time. We're just not aware.
Yeah. And that's really what love is too. Sometimes I think it's a perspective. It's seeing someone and seeing the potential that you have to build a life with this person. It is a way of seeing romance, I think, to some extent, maybe. So I don't know, it's cool to think about how all these things come together.
Yeah. Well, another part that I felt was a sort of two other characters in the book were the locations.
Yes.
Isle of Skye and Mystic, Connecticut. And tell me a little bit about that sense of these characters, the physicality of these characters for you. Your choice in making them.
So Sea and Stars is a Gothic romance. And in the Gothic tradition, the setting really acts as a character, right? It's reflective of the characters who live within it. So I knew because I wanted to tell a Gothic story that the settings would be very important. And Arabella came to me sort of vaguely Scottish. So when I was looking to set her in a specific location, I very quickly settled upon the Isle of Skye because it's steeped in fairy magic, as you know, because you made a pilgrimage there, right? And there's the fairy glen and the fairy pools and all of this fairy lore associated with it. So it really made sense that she would come from this particular place. And I wanted the place to reflect the beauty and the tenacity of the whole Porter line, right? Mm-hmm. That Skye was so embedded in their sense of who they were that it almost couldn't be separated from them. And so I had Skye first, and I knew that she was coming to America, but I hadn't really settled on a place. And I decided to use Mystic, which surprised me when I first realized that I would set the story in Mystic, because this is a place, unlike Skye, that I have been to quite often. I don't live that far from Mystic. I'm in central Connecticut and it's on the coast, but we go to Mystic all the time. And my husband and I love Mystic, and our kids have grown up in Mystic, and we go there year round. And it was interesting to set a story in a place that I had been, because Skye and the setting of my first book, which was Orkney, a archipelago of islands north of Scotland. Yeah. I've never been to either place. So I had to really learn to look at Mystic through the eyes of someone who had never seen it before. And in some ways that was a little bit harder to write about. In terms of using Skye and using Orkney for my first book, I'm very called to those places, to those wild kind of Celtic environments. And I don't know why. I love the stories. I love the settings. I love the way those places look. I would love to travel to them one day. I told my husband I'm going to keep writing about them until he brings me there. So eventually he'll have no choice. But I do have Celtic ancestry, mostly Irish. And I don't know if that's one of the reasons why those places appeal to me. Sometimes I think about that call that we have toward a particular place. And I remember when my kids were little and we'd put them each to bed to sleep in their own beds in their own rooms. And inevitably, they would always, in the night, come into our beds, wake up in the morning. They'd be right between my husband and I. Or when my kids were sick or sad or scared, they would make a beeline straight to me, not because anything I had to say would comfort them, but I think simply because being in my presence was comforting. Because I think in some way, as humans, again, this is maybe a bodily thing, but we're drawn back to our origin or the place of our making in some way. And I don't know if that's why I'm so entranced by these Celtic lands, but I like to think maybe it's my blood drawing me back. And I hope that I do these places justice when I describe them and set my books there. But I very much wanted those two settings to function as representatives of James and Arabella and the Porter family and the Alden family.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because, of course, the minute I was like, oh, Isle of Skye, I'm in, sign me up. I've been there. Like yourself, I was always drawn to those places. And it's kind of a joke, like whenever March 17th comes around, everybody goes Irish. And I'm like, I really wish I had a drop of it. I have nothing. But I've always been drawn to the Celtic stuff, always. And I apparently have a little tiny dash in it.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
I mean, I'm really just claiming that I've done the ancestry, like the DNA ancestry. I knew that northern Portugal, a lot of my ancestors came from there, and that was Celtic. Portugal was Celtic. So I'm sticking to some Celtic there. But there's something to the land of Skye for sure, and Orkney as well, that you are like, oh, I am in a liminal space. This is different. You are. I had the experience, and I was very glad to be able to go. It felt like a pilgrimage because it was so different. And Skye was extremely powerful. Those mountains mean business. Those rocks mean business. And so in reading Arabella, I could see the tenacity because you need the tenacity to live there. Orkney, Orkney felt like you were outside of Scotland and not quite yet in Scandinavia. It was sort of in between, extremely windy and very different. And actually was more soothing our Skye felt more sort of a crossing the threshold with the dweller at the threshold, being like, this is what's happening. So there's a power to the land. And I always have reflected on why are we attracted to certain places? In your case, you have the ancestry. I don't even have necessarily the ancestry, but I feel called soul-wise. It's like, that's my land. But one thing I remember, and it would be interesting when you do go, is it was through the work of the Jungian analyst James Hollis, and he has a whole book about our ancestors. And he said that there's something when you go back to the land of your ancestors, that even if you don't know very much about it, something sort of settles within you, as if your ancestors were like, oh, thank you. You've done the spiral, you've returned. And I felt that when I went to Portugal. It was not a country I wanted to go per se. The history of Portugal, colonization I was not a huge fan, but we did go to Portugal. And I remember my mother, we did this trip together, and everything's just sort of, all the little Lego parts just fell in peace. And we're like, we get it. I understood. Like there was a sort of a calming inside of, yes, our ancestors came from here. I understand certain things now. I couldn't quite name it, but there was a sort of a calming of it. So
that's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. And I could see why you would be drawn to, in your profession, your line of work, just to liminal spaces, right? Because liminality is something that attracts you in your work. And it's definitely something that attracts me in studying literature and fairy tale and folklore. Like, they always take place in liminal spaces of transition, right? That's the setting of the fairy tale. So obviously Skye and Orkney are such liminal places. And Mystic is quite a liminal place as well, in a different way. But it is carved out of two different towns, and it straddles a river, which is a tidal estuary. So it pushes in from Fisher's Island Sound. So there's just a very liminal feel to Mystic. And I was reading something, and I don't know how accurate this is, but I was reading something about geography and the geography of the earth and the history of the earth, and that the mountains of Skye and the highlands, right, were at one time, at least in theory, connected to the Appalachian Trail, which is something that actually begins in Connecticut. The very tail beginning of it is we don't have many mountains in Connecticut, but the very beginning of the Appalachian Trail is situated in Connecticut. And I like the idea that even though those settings are so distinct and they represent two very different families and two different systems of belief, that maybe there is some historical connection between James and Arabella and the lands that they live in. And I think consequently, too, we're all from all of these places, right? Even though, whatever drop of blood we might have, things have been so mixed over the years, right? That we can probably connect with the ancestors from any place because it's probably deep within our blood somewhere.
Definitely. I have read that too. I did read that on a book about the history of Scotland and how eons ago it was meshed together. And it's probably why the South, certain parts of the South, did attract so many Irish and Scottish and, had a huge influence on the language and the music. Yeah. So we gravitate. There's something. Again, I feel like it's the ensoulment of the world. It calls to you. Yeah. It's not just us going. We get called.
I think so.
And one thing it's kind of like a sharp curve now, turn here, but I'm just curious because in reading, your notes at the end of the book, you mentioned something about the sort of ineffective father and Arabella's father. OMG. I'm not going to swear in my podcast, but damn. And while the whole time I'm like, I want to go in there and just shake him. But that point was interesting to me because Beauty and the Beast, a lot of these fairy tales, and to a certain degree, I kind of take them all back to Persephone and Hades. To me, that's the OG of the Beauty and the Beast. I don't know if it's academically sound to say that, but to me, I feel that resonance. And the fathers are ineffective. They're either not present, they're a hot mess, or they're not helpful. And what do you think about that? These stories where the father is the parental figure is so, what I would call it, a loose handshake. A limp handshake.
It's so prevalent in fairy tales, and you see it in Beauty and the Beast. You even see it in fairy tales like Cinderella and Snow White. We might not realize it because, of course, those stories tend to come to us, at least popularly, through Disney, and Disney will kill off the parents rather than leave them there to be ineffective, because Disney, of course, has a good marketing strategy and knows that the parents are paying the money. But a lot of times those fathers are present while their daughters are being persecuted by stepmothers or by people, and they're just not doing anything to help the daughters. So it is definitely something that is prevalent in fairy tales, and something I wanted to explore in my book as well. I think sometimes that the fathers are ineffective, or sometimes the mothers are ineffective, or they're killed off in fairy tales, in part because fairy tales tend to focus on the protagonist. And oftentimes, and you see this in children's literature too, or young adult literature, in order for the young character to really move into the space of adulthood, the blocking figures need to be removed, right? So a good parent who is either going to protect their child from danger or usher their child, safely through the world is a good thing in real life, but in terms of storytelling is not always a good thing because it prevents the child from actually encountering the struggles that they need to encounter to move through the world and transition. So I think a lot of times fairy tales give us those templates for ineffective parental figures because the focus is on the younger character, and the younger characters need to begin a life of their own rather than live the life that their parents have chosen for them.
Yeah, I'm just thinking here in terms of sort of bringing the sort of family systems and depth psychology. It's interesting how many stories then we have where there's a lack of elders, that the parent who should be at that point an elder is shown as ineffective. And if there is going to be an elder character who is mentor wise, is going to come as a fairy godmother or sort of an encounter that the character has, but it won't come from the parent per se.
Yeah. And I think that's true of the fairy tales that we culturally circulate for sure. Mm-hmm. But there are fairy tales that do have those older, wiser characters. They're just not popular in our culture. So you can look at the stories that we tell culturally and you can learn something about our culture from that. We are a very youth-obsessed culture. We don't have a lot of reverence for the type of wisdom that does come from age. And I think that is something that's missing in our culture. And it would be nice to have a little more of that. Wisdom and age are not always aligned together. But when they are aligned together, I think that's a really purposeful and productive thing for society as a whole.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It is more of a perspective on how we see things because the stories are there. But we're not using them. We're not circulating them. And so I guess two things kind of I can sort of sense is one is maybe there is a need to start speaking to that, start entering. Like, for an example, in your book, James's grandmother, in some ways, to me, was that elder. Yeah. She had her prejudice, but she was helpful. She used it, her power, in the way she could to help Arabella. So I think we need that, starting to have that kind of sense of representation. And when you said age and wisdom don't go together, I absolutely agree. And my little particular soapbox is the Gen Xers as a generation are having to learn to elder, but we don't have a model of eldering. Because the boomers gave us other things, but they did not give us elders. Yeah. The government, as we see, they're not eldering. But turning it around a little bit about the actual writing process, what was the hardest part for you in writing? And what did it ask of you? What growing edge did you have?
The hardest part of writing the book would be just the fact that I'm doing it largely on my own. And that's not to say that I'm doing it entirely on my own, because I have so many people who have helped me with this book along the way. Like I said, my editor, Kate, I call her my fairy godmother, was the one who prompted the book. She read an early version of the book and gave me editorial feedback. And I had beta readers and I had people who've read the book and given me feedback, and even my husband helping me to upload the book and, do the tax stuff associated with the book and carry the books into the book shows. I have so much help. So I don't mean to say that I'm a one-woman show by any means, but I feel like I am writing on my own to some extent, at least when compared to the writing that I do for the Fairy Tale Magazine or Eternal Haunted Summer, or when I submit to a call for submission. Because when I submit to those calls or I'm fulfilling an assignment that one of my bosses gives me, I have their needs in mind, right? I understand that they have certain expectations. I understand that there's a readership for the magazine or for the anthology that will have a certain expectation. And I think that I cater my writing to those expectations to some degree. And I think that that's a natural thing for me to do because I'm a teacher and we're trained to cater our instruction to the needs of the learner sitting in front of us, right? So it's not that my voice is inauthentic when I'm writing for those venues. It's just that I'm conscious of having a path to follow. And when I was writing Sea and Stars and Selkie Moon, which was my first book, and I was really writing them for myself, for my own label, Incantation Press, there wasn't anyone over me sort of giving me that expectation. And that was a really difficult thing for me to come to terms with, that I had to sort of navigate this on my own. There were ineffective parent figures. Right? they weren't guiding me. So I had to learn to do that. And I think in some ways that has been a really good struggle for me to go through, because on the other side of that, I've been so surprised to find that there are people who are now coming to my writing through my books that don't know my work through the magazine, but they're kind of coming to me through these things I've written on my own. And I think that that gives me a little bit of confidence in my ability to tell a story from a place that is very authentic. But that was definitely the hardest thing for me was feeling, am I doing it right? Am I going to, I think I'm a people pleaser. So am I going to give people what they want, not knowing who the people that I'm giving the book to are going to be? That was very difficult for me.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I was thinking here about, I was thinking as we grow, and I know that from our chats that we know we both have lost our mothers, and I my father as well. So I felt there was a sense of really coming of age in not having a parental figure. Whatever the relationship was, all of a sudden it's like there's no one above me, And as you were talking, I was thinking how interesting that when you're writing for a magazine or for your teaching, for whatever, there's a container. In the container, there's an expectation, and it helps you. It helps you craft, because there's that sort of, this is the container. That's what you do. But all of a sudden, you're creating something that you can only answer to yourself. What does Kelly want?
Yeah.
And the reader is this amorphous figure on the other side that you might not know yet. But you're having to put things in the story that are yours. What do you want? And I think that's interesting, because I think one of the gifts of romance, I think other stories as well, but romance works a lot around desire. What does one want? And so in some ways, kind of like Arabella yourself, you were going to be like, am I going to get on this ship? Am I going to go over? Am I going to do this thing? And it is a growing edge to all of a sudden say, I want to do what I want to do.
And it's both frightening and empowering at the same time. And I love the way you've spoken about all of that and the complexity of it, because it is, I do think, especially when we lose our mothers, maybe like we are a child again in that grief.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like you just said about fairy tales. The reason you have, or at least the stories we tend to sort of keep pumping into the culture more and more, is that the main character doesn't have the parents in some degree, so that they can express their sovereignty. And by making the choices. And so you did it. You did it. And what is it that, now being on the other side, you have a novella, The Selkie Moon, right? That's the name. Yes. And Sea and Stars. What now being on this other side, what did writing give you that you didn't expect?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. I feel like I have been a writer my entire life, though I have only published for a very short space of time. So I've only been publishing for just over 5 years. But I've always just approached the world through the lens of a writer, I feel. I've always had stories circulating in my head. It's the sharing of the stories that is very new. And I suppose that in publishing my own work and even in publishing my work at the magazine and in the different journals that I've submitted to, there is this sense that my stories do have a place to go beyond myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's given me a connection to the world at large that I didn't necessarily know was there before, because everything just kind of took place in my own mind and in my own little imagination. And now, no matter how small those connections might be, they're definitely there. And I think that they change the way I move through the world in ways that I probably can't even articulate.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe by the third book.
We'll loop back around to that one.
Loop back. And what part of Scotland are you going to be writing about? Or Ireland? I mean, you have to tell your husband, we're doing research. That's why we're going over there.
That's right. It's a tax write-off, honey.
It's a tax write-off. Exactly. And from writing this book, what do you feel you're carrying out to your teaching? And what's kind of returning to you as a teacher?
Yeah, I think that in terms of my teaching, when I teach about stories and I tell my students that I've written stories of my own, I think they see that in some way as a complete circle, right? That I'm not just teaching stories in class because that's my day job and that's what I get paid to do. I'm really there because I love stories. I love storytelling. I love thinking about storytelling. I love sharing stories with other people. So I think that it gives me a sense of completion in my teaching, that I'm not only reading stories and talking about stories, but I'm writing stories of my own. I tend to think of writing as a very long conversation that takes place over time, among different people, among different cultures. And I feel like writing the books has given me a chance to add my voice to that conversation in a way. Mm-hmm. So I think it just gives me a sense of completion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm imagining here as a student to know that their teacher, they're not just talking the talk, they're walking that talk, So if they are talking about, these are some of the challenges, this is the landscape, they know the landscape. They know. And I guess just going back to you, because something you mentioned earlier, and it's also in the notes in your book, that, as we know, romance is not taken seriously, and you're coming from a literature background. What do you notice about how people speak to romance? And now you've written a historical romance with gothic vibes. How do you stand in that conversation,
I tend to love the literature that has been marginalized. That just tends to be my place in the world. I teach children's literature. I teach fairy tale and folklore. I love romance. So I've always been, I think, an advocate for those stories that people dismiss as being inconsequential. And I enjoy finding deep meaning in those stories and then sharing that meaning with other people. Romance is, I would say, a marginalized genre in academia. There are some academics who embrace it, but it doesn't seem to be as lauded a genre as other things are. I think that has a lot to do with the patriarchy that we live in, quite frankly, because I think that romance is largely a genre that is written for women and by women, not exclusively, but that tends to be statistically where it comes from. And I think that a lot of the prejudice against it stems from patriarchal prejudice against women. I've been studying romance the whole time I've been studying literature, though. I laugh because I know you talk about your thesis, which was The Healing Power of Fluff, I think was the title.
Yeah.
And you looked at romantic comedies. And in my master's thesis, it was called The Indoctrination of Desire.
Oh.
And I studied women and sexuality and marriage in 18th and 19th century British domestic fiction, which is really just an academic way of saying romance.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre and Emma and all of those novels and looking at the romantic elements of them. And I think that's a valid thing to do. And I think it yields so much. And I don't think it should be marginalized, even though it is. So I think I've just always stood in defense of finding meaning in the smallest of things, which is sort of the message, I suppose, in my book, Sea and Stars as well, right? That message that Arabella's grandmother gives her early on in the book, and she has to kind of learn that throughout the text of the book, but that multum in parvo, that there is much in a little, that the smallest things in this world can carry deep meaning.
Yes, very much. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in the power of the small.
Yes.
And how it kind of can go in and sort of be a catalyst and
and it's subversive in that way, right? It can do things that maybe more noticed genres of fiction cannot do because it's flying under the radar. And that's just a really comfortable place for me to live my life. I've always sort of flown under the radar. I've always sort of been, I'm the youngest child. I'm the smallest. I'm the least. I'm the last. So I just live my life from that point of view. And I think I've always cherished things that reflect that in some way.
Yeah. It's like you're touched by the power of the liminal. I think once one is sort of aware of the liminal and its geography, knows it's always there. You see it in every place.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking here, like for the reader, is there anything you hope that they walk away with from the story, or?
Yeah, I hope they walk away knowing that there's magic in the world and that sometimes there's magic in love or in loving someone, in finding someone to love, in being loving towards someone, that those are magical things that can change your life and can change the world. So I suppose that lesson of multum in parvo is something I hope lasts in the reader's mind as well. I hope my readers know how grateful I am to them for reading the book. Because I do think meaning is created in that liminal space. I've written the story, but they're really breathing life into the words that I've put on the page. And without them, that version of the story would never exist. And I feel so grateful to anyone who picks up a copy of Sea and Stars. There are so many books in this world, and so many things to read. And we all have to be read lists, which are so long, and will we ever finish them, right? It's impossible, right? So to anyone who, for whatever reason, picks up Sea and Stars and envisions James and Arabella in the way that only they can, I'm incredibly grateful, and I hope that they know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's definitely an alchemical process, right? You create it comes through you, it carries things that are yours, and then us as readers, we bring our own stuff, and then it gives the characters more life, and of course, as a reader, each one of us is going to have James and Arabella be something slightly different than perhaps you even imagined. But that's the magic of it. I think that's how these, I think a lot about the idea of the mundus imaginalis, the moon, this world that is liminal, where I feel these characters live there. And when we interact with the stories, they're coming alive in our world through us, Yeah. And so there's magic right there, Now, in terms of writing, now that you've done this, and I know this is, I mean, comes out in July, so there's still a lot more for you to talk about the book, talk to more people about the book. But is there a story that's already pulling you next? Or something, an edge of yourself moving towards something? A little knock on your door?
Yeah, there are always stories. Like I can't remember my life without there being stories sort of twirling around me just outside my field of vision. So there are always stories that are calling to me. In the immediate future, I have some things that I have to write, some short pieces for the magazines that I work for, and some things I have to do for school. But I'm hoping this summer to work in earnest on what I hope will be my next novel. It will again be a romance because I love romance, and it will be informed by fairy tale and folklore as well, though this time a fairy tale that is less popularly circulated than Beauty and the Beast, the stories of kind and unkind girls. So stories like Diamonds and Toads or Strawberries in the Snow, that's sort of informing that tale. And so I'm hoping to work on that. That's definitely the one has the loudest knock at the door right now.
Yeah, oh, good. Okay. We're excited for that already. Okay. So now we're going to our actor studio meets Stephen Colbert. Oh, he's wrapping up his show. Five questions, rapid fire. And so...
this is what I'm nervous about.
Just answer from your gut, wherever you want to go. So are you ready?
Yes.
So, number one, a book you've read so many times, the spine has given up. What is it?
Pride and Prejudice.
My girl, yes.
Okay, same taste.
So second question there of the BBC adaptations. Well, there's a BBC adaptation and there was the movie. Are you a Colin Firth fan or McFadden fan?
Oh, I like them both. And I'm not particularly drawn toward either one because like you said, Mr. Darcy kind of exists in my mind separate from those. And I read it so many times before I ever saw it. So I accept both as appropriate variants. And neither one quite matches the Mr. Darcy in my head, but that's okay.
Yeah. I saw Colin Firth first. So for a long time, it was him. I like how the stiffness of Darcy that he did. Yeah. But I like McFadden's, in a way, sort of expressing the interiority of Darcy that we don't get to see in the first BBC production, or that I didn't feel like in the book we get to see. So I do appreciate that. Yeah. But diplomatic answer, go you. I know it's a divisive question. Okay. And number two, which fairy tale character did you secretly think you were growing up? And were you right?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think I ever thought of myself as a fairy tale character. When I was a little girl, before I knew about Beauty and the Beast as a fairy tale, I would say my favorite fairy tale was probably Snow White. And it was because I had a book of Snow White and it was illustrated and it had a picture of her mother sitting in the window of a castle. And it had the beautiful paned window with the diamond paned glass. And she was sitting there and sewing and wishing for a child. And I remember loving that picture. And then there was another picture in the book where Snow White was running through the forest and the branches and the roots of the trees were reaching out to trip her. And there were eyes in the forest and it was all very frightening and scary. And I loved that picture as well. So I don't know that I ever thought of myself as a fairy tale character, as Snow White, but I certainly liked that story in my youth until I found Beauty and the Beast. And then I was all in on that one.
I got to play the Evil Queen in Snow White when I was 6.
Yeah.
I did. And I was very disappointed because I thought I should have been Snow White, but I wasn't paying attention, so they didn't pick me. But
I will say, though, the evil characters are much more fun to play. My middle son did acting when he was in high school and middle school, and he would always get cast as the evil characters. And he loved it. They're just, you need a good character actor to play someone evil. So it was probably a compliment that you were cast as the evil queen instead of Snow White.
I remember I did fall on stage at some point, but I was 6. But I did get standing ovation. I don't know if it's because they were, sort of feeling sorry for the fact that I fell, but I still have photos of it. And I did look pretty, sort of mean. So I did a good job.
I want to see those photos.
It was hilarious. But yeah, so I would say that Snow White is the reason I never became an actress. I was like, this is over for me. I'm not doing this. Now, number 3, the most romantic sentence ever written in any book by anyone. What comes to mind first?
Oh, my goodness. As you wish, from The Princess Bride.
Because that's what he says, as you wish, right?
As you wish, yeah. That's what comes to mind. And it's probably because it's easy to remember. I don't know if I had time to look through all my books, I might be able to find something more convincing. But I do love the romance in The Princess Bride as well. And it's fresh in my mind. So that's my rapid fire answer.
Yeah, no. I mean, nothing better than as you wish, honey, as you wish. Delivered with honesty, it's great. That's true. Okay, in your writing life, if you had a fairy godmother, what's the one wish that she already granted you that you didn't even know you were asking for?
Oh, so I do have a fairy godmother, and it is Kate. I've mentioned her at least 3 times, I think, in this interview already, and I talk about her in every interview I do. She was the founder of the Fairy Tale magazine. She's since retired, and it's now edited by Kristen Baum DiBiase, who is wonderful as well. But Kate was the founder and editor of the magazine, and I met her when I took a class through the Carter Haas School of Folklore and the Fantastic. It was just this little online class about fairy tales. And I took it because I was at kind of a low point in my life, and I just wanted something to lift me up. And I wanted to meet people who enjoyed fairy tales and literature and things like that. And I took the class, and we used to respond to little quests and post these little writings that we did. And Kate was a part of the class, and she liked the things that I posted, and she contacted me and she said, will you please submit something to the Fairy Tale magazine? And I thought to myself, well, okay, if you'd like me to, I will. And shortly after that, I won a contest there. And then she asked me to come work for the magazine. And I think at every step of the way, I would ask her, well, like, are you sure you want me to do this? I had long since rationalized the fact that although I am a writer on the inside, I was probably never going to write or publish anything. And she was really the person who kept prompting me to publish and to submit and to continue. And it wasn't something I asked her to do in any way. So I think she is my fairy godmother, and she did sort of give me the key that unlocked my writer's voice in some way. And I'm very grateful to her.
Yeah, that's a beautiful recognition, because I think that's the beauty of, well, there's an element of the elder, the mentor, seeing in you something that you might not even been seeing yet, and being
Absolutely.
able to invite it out of you, right? And like the true meaning of the word educate, to bring it out of you.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm 1,000% certain without her prompting, I never would have submitted my work anywhere. I really, she really is the fairy godmother who descended and gave me the dress. So
definitely, now we hold, a big book, Okay, last one. You did it. So now you get to finish this sentence. A real love story always has ... in it.
The first word that popped into my mind was romance, but it feels like that's a cop-out. So maybe, I guess, as a second choice, because I do think you need romance, I guess I would say choice. Because I think that without choice. And that goes back to what we said at the beginning with Beauty and the Beast, and that ability to choose someone, but also to be chosen. I think that that's the essence of what true love is to be chosen and to choose someone and to continue making that choice over time. It's a series of choices.
The series of choices, yeah.
That moves you toward love. So I think I would say choice.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And within your answer, I can also see that there's an element of being seen.
Yeah.
Because you get to be seen, right? That's the whole thing with Beauty and the Beast. You see beneath the appearance, you know.
It really is. And with Beauty and the Beast in the movie, when I went to see the movie with my boyfriend, and when the Beast gave Belle the library, which I felt was such a moment of seeing her, right? She didn't ask for the library, but here was the Beast giving her that adventure in the great wide somewhere that she sang about at the beginning. And I think when he did that, I audibly gasped in the theater because I thought it was such a beautiful moment. And my boyfriend leaned over and he said, if you marry me one day, I'll build you a library. And that's the library that I'm sitting in, because I did marry him and he promised me he would build me a library. And it took us a really long time, but he walled in the shelves and gave me a place for my books. And we call it, the Belle Library. I've got a picture of Belle hanging on the wall over there. So I do think that love and choice, it is about being seen for who you truly are, not who people want you to be. There's something about a good love story that segues with those ideas.
Yeah, and that's the thing I see as healing and medicinal in romance, especially. Not that other books can't have this, but this ability to be seen underneath the. Well, my husband has given me all the IKEA bookshelves.
You know what? Those count. He did a good job.
And he put them up, and I'm loving it.
And that counts. That's a library. He gave you a library too.
Yeah. Well, it's not a rapid fire question, but since we've been talking about romance, what for you, when you hear the romancing the threshold, which I named the podcast, what for you does that mean?
I love the name of the podcast, Romancing the Threshold, first of all, let me just say, because I love liminality and I love thresholds. I talk about them all the time in my class, and I love romance. So it makes sense that I love the name of the podcast. But for me, it means romancing life itself. Because we move through a series of thresholds in life, a series of liminal spaces in life. But I think that all of life is really quite liminal, like we're moving through it in some way. So romancing the threshold in that larger sense is romancing life itself and bringing a sense of magic and a spirit of playfulness and a spirit of beauty to the everyday. Finding the magic in the mundane and the mundane and the magic and everyday enchantment. That's what romancing the threshold means to me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really what I wanted to kind of bring forth, because we live in a news cycle that is constantly telling us to brace for impact. And that's exhausting. It's not the reason. It doesn't make life worth living if that's what it is. And like yourself, I do like the liminal and the threshold and a little bit of romance, a dash of magic.
Yeah. And I love your argument that romance is medicine of a form. I think that that's a really beautiful way to look at it.
What for you strikes about that? Like now, being both a writer of romance, working with it, having your literature background, where would you see the medicine?
I just suppose calling it medicine gives it some weight and some meaning, which it seems to be absent of in the general perception. Not that I think it's absent of meaning, but generally we don't think of romance as something that is medicinal, right? When we call something medicinal, we're elevating it.
Yeah.
And when we talk about romance, we're diminishing it. And the way you bring those two things together, I think is really beautiful. I did grow up with a mother who was a nurse, and her dream in life was that I would be a doctor. And I told her I would be a doctor, all the way up through high school. I could never have been a doctor. I did not have the ability to be a doctor, but I persisted with this to make her happy for a very long time. And she was not thrilled that I wanted to live my life around stories, because she really didn't think that necessarily had the same level of value. So I like the idea. I suppose it comforts a little bit of the child in me to think that, well, maybe there's some medicine in the stories that we tell. So I think that it's a beautiful way to bring together the things that we uphold and the things that we diminish, and have them meet in the middle or at the threshold and make some form of magic.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think stories are extremely medicinal. That's what therapy is about, in many ways. You're telling that story, and perhaps through telling your stories to someone who's deeply listening and picking up on elements, you can find the healing in the story and you become a more main character of your life rather. I think it's very medicinal. And unfortunately, I think in our world, we're being sold very poor stories.
Yeah.
Devoid of nutritional value. Well, Kelly, this has been wonderful. I know we probably could talk for several hours, which would be great. And, we might have to do another episode. So I'm just putting it out there. But is there anything that you feel like you'd like to say for the listener, for the future reader of your books, or anything that is of mine that you want to share?
No, not really. I want to thank you for having me on your podcast. It was so humbling to be asked to be a guest on your podcast. I am new to the romance genre. Sea and Stars is my first romance. So to have someone who has studied romance and who has read so many romances give me the space to talk about my little book is incredibly humbling. And it's just, it is incredibly meaningful to me. So again, you might have to be another fairy godmother in my life. I am a lucky girl. I have a lot of them. I appreciate it, more than I could say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I came through romance kind of somewhat late, but then realizing it was always there. And I don't have the literary background, but I've been wanting, like yourself, I admire things that are dismissed, considered fluff. And I think there's a lot of power in those things, the power of the small. And I think it's no small feat to sit down with the muses and write and wrestle with your own resistance and do the things, put it on paper, put it out into the world, giving birth to it. That's an immense labor and that's good that you had fairy godmothers, because, they were midwives.
Yes. Midwives of the imagination.
Yeah. Oh, see, that's a T-shirt waiting to happen. that's at least a sticker.
A hashtag at least.
Hashtag it. You got to use that somewhere. Just please do. That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Kelly. And I hope the readers enjoyed the book as much as I did. Arabella and James are here waiting for you. And James, what a swoon. But I'm all the best of luck for the publication date of the book when it's out.
Thank you, truly.
You're welcome. There's a phrase I've been turning in my mind over lately. Multum in parvo. And I'm sorry to be butchering the Latin. It means much in little. The idea that the smallest things, a handful of herbs, a cup of tea made with real attention, someone who notices what the rest of us walk right past. All of these carry far more than we see. And that these things can also turn a life, that they can change what a person believes is possible for them. I think this is the whole argument I've been dancing around and circling with this podcast and this exploration of how do we romance the threshold. We live in a culture that confuses loud with important and big with real. So the small gets dismissed It is the fairy tale, the love story, the romance, the genre written by women and for women in general, that the serious world has spent more than a century waving off as fluff. But the small is where the medicine has been hiding the whole time. It always was. And we just stopped holding the shell to our ear. And notice what Kelly named as the heart of a real love story. It is not passion, although passion is needed. It is not fate, depending on what you believe. It is choice. To choose someone and to be chosen, and then to keep choosing again and again over time. To be seen for who you are and to stay and to choose anyway. That may feel like it's a small kind of magic. It may feel very small, but actually, if you think about it, it's big magic. So here's what I want to leave you with. Somewhere on your own shoreline this week, there is something you keep stepping over because it looks too small to feel or to be the thing or to be important. Maybe it is the quiet pull towards a book, towards a place, towards an idea. Or maybe it's the daily ritual that nobody would call it important, but it means something to you. And this is where the medicine is. This is where it has been hiding for you. What is the small thing that is holding the door for you? And this is the week for you to notice. Kelly's novel, Sea and Stars, comes out July 7th. And if you're the kind of reader who has always suspected that the dismissed things are the ones that carry the deep things, I invite you to go find it, pre-order it. It is a lovely book and it will stay with you. So until next time, keep walking your shoreline, keep picking up what you find, and don't forget to hold a shell to your ear because the sea speaks.